Well, happy National Poetry Month to you. It's time for me to share as many poetry activities, poetry projects, and poetry workshops as I can muster over here at Spark Creativity. Today, I'm going to walk you through 5 of my favorites, but I want to send you over to the blog if you're looking for even more creative poetry options for your classroom this month. There, I'm going to have 10. Okay, so 5 here on the pod, 5 a little bit the quick version, and then if you want the full-on version with all the visuals, you will find that on the blog. We're going to start with one of my favorite introductory activities for any poetry unit, poetry collage, and then go full steam ahead with blackout poetry, flash verse, how to incorporate performance poetry into your class, and more. Welcome to the Spark Creativity Teacher Podcast, a podcast for English teachers looking for more. More creativity, more engagement, more joy, and no more scripted curriculum, lesson planning ruts, or boring book lists. I'm Betsy Potash, and I'm honored you're trusting me to help. You're not alone on this creative journey anymore. Okay, first things first, and this is often my first thing when I'm kicking off a poetry unit. I really like this project, and I call it the Poetry Collage. This is basically a chance for students to go exploring in a collection of poetry. Now, that collection could be a book that you're reading in class. It could be an online site that has a lot of different poems. It could be like a series of slides where you've cut and pasted a bunch of poems that you want students to explore. The resource that I've usually used for this is a curation by Poet Laureate Billy Collins at the Library of Congress, which is called Poetry 180. And in this collection, he picked out one poem per day for the school year, 180 days of school. And I've had success using that for my students, so you might too, but you might also have some other collection. It really doesn't matter as long as it feels right for your classroom. The idea is that you give students some time to just go exploring and invite them to choose lines that they love, language that stands out to them. This is kind of like a poetry warm-up, right? Like how before tennis practice, you might have kids jog around and stretch a little bit. This is a chance for students to look at some poems by a lot of different authors, people who write in different ways, and start to decide like, hey, what stands out to me? What do I like when it comes to poetry? So what I have them do, and you can tweak this or do it just like I do, is I have them choose their 6 favorite lines from 6 different poems. And they write down the line and the poet and the title of the poem. And then they're going to do a remix, and they're going to take those lines and they're going to put them onto the page in some order that makes sense to them. They can scatter them across the page however they want, and they're going to add in color, illustration. They can superimpose photos, they can draw, they can just use like color splashes, and they can do it with pens and pencils, or they can do it online on a Google slide, or they can do it in Canva. And at the end, they're just going to have this sort of one-page representation of what they loved about the collection, right? The 6 lines may tell a story, or they may just sort of stand out against each other in different interesting ways. They may be illustrated or contrasted by the art. And then you can have students go around in a gallery walk and see everybody else's poetry collage. You can have them do some writing to explain it if you want, or not. I do suggest you do like a quick sources cited to keep best practices in mind for them with their representation of other people's work. So if they're pulling photos or art from the internet that are not their own, they should cite those. They can put up the list of poems that they took the lines from, just to help them keep in mind sort of what's right. But it's really fun to see what kids come up with, and I just think it sort of paves the way for any poetry unit. Okay, next up I want to talk about blackout poetry. I don't think this is a new subject for any of us. What's new for me maybe in making blackout poetry more exciting is the concept of doing it digitally. I think for a lot of folks, it can be hard to find old book pages that they want to rip apart for blackout poetry. And it feels like it takes a long time to sort of Sharpie across the whole page. And then a few students are really artistic with creating images woven through the words that they're not going to black out. And some students just find that totally overwhelming. And I don't want to say that physical blackout poetry is dead or that we shouldn't do it. I still love it. I'm still all for it. I've done a fair amount of it myself, and I think it's fantastic. But I think there's an exciting new addition in the world of digital blackout poetry because it's so easy to screenshot any text, drop it on a slide or a Canva doc, and you have your ripped out page without ripping out any pages. So if you want students to be doing blackout on a page from like the actual text that you're reading, if you maybe want to theme the blackout poetry and say like, make a blackout poem that relates to the theme of this book, and I'm giving you this page that sort of has this incredible description of the main symbol of the text or whatever, you can really easily do that with digital blackout poetry. The other thing I really like about digital blackout poetry is that everybody can add imagery in and around the poem. You don't have to have that like 3 steps ahead artistic vision where you're like doodling it in and around the words beforehand and then you black out around it. Kids who can do that beautifully, wow. I've seen some incredible stuff from other classrooms, but it's hard. You have to be really artistic to do that. Whereas if you create a blackout poem in Canva or on Google Slides, and then you start to superimpose your digital imagery around the words, that is a really doable thing, in my opinion, for almost everybody, right? If you create a blackout poem and then you want to put poppies all over it, you can lay those poppies on top instead of having to have sketched them in all around the words. And then at the end, you get this really amazing final product, whether or not you're, naturally super artistic. So I think that's an exciting lens on blackout poetry. Okay, next I just want to throw out a book title because I just keep talking to folks who have never heard of it. And since you're listening and hanging out with me today, you may already know it because we talk about Jason Reynolds a lot. But he has this novel-length poem called Ain't Burned All the Bright. And it's a collaboration with an artist named Jason Griffin. And it is very sort of set in one specific moment in time. It's set during the pandemic. And in that way, it felt very current and relevant during the pandemic. And now it feels, I don't know, I guess it's like historical fiction poetry because it's just set right inside that moment. It evokes that moment so much. But that doesn't make it any less interesting and important and wonderful because, all of our students that we have now lived through that pandemic and the protests that were happening at that time. And so I just think if you've never read it before, take a peek. It could be a cool book to have on display during National Poetry Month. It's basically set inside the apartment of a boy, like maybe a young teen, whose grandfather is sick with COVID and who is watching the George Floyd protests on TV. And it's a 4-line poem spread across the entire hardcover book with just these stunning illustrations woven in and out and through that help to tell the story. I don't want to call it a graphic novel. I don't want to call it an illustrated collection of poetry. It's like a completely different thing. It's a true weaving together of the two genres. And it's unlike what you see. And so it could be a great thing to incorporate somehow during National Poetry Month. Okay, next I want to talk about flash verse. This is an idea that I've had this month as I've been rereading Long Way Down and designing curriculum for it. But I really think it would work great with any novel in verse or honestly just with any poetry unit. The idea is that you start with maybe some writing sprints or just like a 20-minute writing workshop, and you have students get the nuts and bolts down of a story. But that story is going to turn into a series of poems that are going to tell the story. So like a novel in verse, but one story in verse. That's why I'm calling it flash verse. So students write their short story, and then you have them go through and you have them star 3 moments in their story that really tell that little bit of action. And you can have them kind of underline what's the language in that description of those moments that stands out the most. It's the most interesting. And then you're going to have them remix those 3 moments into 3 poems. And then what I suggest is looking at a few of Jason Reynolds' amazing verse text, like, for example, Long Way Down, and the way he uses the page as part of the structure to tell the story. So his poems don't just like go down the page, right? He moves the words around, or he splits the words, or he does all these different things to help make the structure of the line help to tell the story. So that would be a great mentor text for helping students think about how they can move their words around in the 3 poems to sort of give them meaning, have them help to tell the story. And then also, if you want to use a mentor text like Ain't Burned All the Bright that we were just talking about, you can sort of help them see, can they also illustrate behind the words, around the words, on top of the words in a way that also helps tell the story. So in that case, it becomes kind of an illuminated flash verse. And I'm just really into the idea of this project right now. I think it could really help kids in the same way that reading a verse novel can help kids feel more comfortable with reading. I feel like flash verse as a writing project could really help students feel excited about the story they're telling without feeling overwhelmed by having to write something really long. Okay, that's 4. One more to go. I want to talk about how my favorite way to incorporate performance poetry into the classroom. This is something I have done so much of as I've done poetry slam units. And it's a really simple idea. It allows you to build a performance poem into any day of class. What I do is I talk about how in slam poetry, a poet gets up and tells their poem, and then the 3 judges, completely subjectively give it a score from 1 to 10. So they could be like, oh my gosh, that poem was absolutely incredible, I give it a 10. Or it could strike a really bad chord with them, and they could be like, I hated it, I give it a 1, right? And different judges on the same panel could give wildly different scores. There's not one rubric. There's not one way to define in the universe what poem is powerful, what poem has a meaningful theme, what poem has a beautiful structure. That is really subjective. And I like giving students the chance to say, like, I love that, or I thought that was wretched. And I think they like it too. And so I have done this over and over again. I will cue up a performance piece. I will tell them they're the judge, and I will play it. And then I'll say, okay, give it your 1 to 10 and write down a line or 2 about why. And then I'll call on kids. And it's hilarious to watch them be like, I gave that a 9. That was one of the most powerful things I've ever seen. I really related to it. I thought the rhyme was great. And then I call on the next person. They're like, I gave it a 3. That was so boring. Those metaphors didn't even work. And then I go to the next person and they're like, I gave it a 7, blah, blah, blah. But it's just, they have this chance to see that taste matters and different people resonate with different things, and performance poetry is art. It's not just like, okay, did you use 5 metaphors and 3 rhymes and, was there assonance? It's not a matter of a rubric that applies to this art to make it good or bad. It's very personal, and I think that's helpful for students to know. Thanks so much for joining me today to talk about 5 creative ways to incorporate poetry into your classroom this National Poetry Month or any old time. Remember, there are 5 more waiting for you on the blog over at nowsparkcreativity.com, so feel free to follow up. Until next time, take care of yourself and stay creative.